I think I should welcome her properly. You know, I find it interesting that all of these girls who are in all of these online beefs all got either a project coming out or threatening to put a project out. It's wild. It's like they're taking all of this weirdo gossip and, they're doing it for clout. There is no Diddy tolerance. This is a no Diddy zone. So anybody that says anything that's pro Diddy, yeah.
Y'all, this wasn't supposed to come out. This wasn't supposed to be seen. And it definitely wasn't supposed to destroy an entire image overnight. What you're about to hear isn't just gossip. It's a public collapse, a private betrayal, and a tragedy playing out in real time. Because the moment Jaguar Wright went live, everything burned. One name, one leak, one reaction so explosive, the internet froze. Claressa Shields, the symbol of strength, discipline, loyalty, lost control. Not behind closed doors, not in whispers, but in full public view. Sources say when the leaked tape allegedly surfaced, involving her ex-fiancé, not the man she stood beside publicly, Claressa didn't deny it. She exploded. Phones rang. Lawyers panicked. Silence turned into chaos. Because this wasn't just about a tape. It was about two lives, one lie, and a dangerous double game. For months, fans were sold a perfect story. Power couple, unbreakable bond, ride or die love. But behind the smiles, behind the cameras, behind the captions, another story was allegedly being written. Secret calls, private meetings, and choices that were never meant to see daylight. Jaguar Wright didn't just expose content, she exposed intent. And when the truth cracked open, the fallout was brutal. A man who trusted too much. A woman accused of playing both sides. And a past that refused to stay buried. Social media erupted. Clips spread like wildfire. Questions hit harder than accusations. Was the love real? Was the image fake? And who was really using who? This isn't about shame. This is about consequences. Because when the mask slips, strength turns to rage, silence turns to screams, and reputations don't just fall, they shatter. And this is only the beginning.
What did Claressa do? She decided to become a part of a farce that is destroying what Black family looks like. Like, the simple fact that she thinks any of the stuff that she's doing, going back and forth with Remy, when Pap is still married and they have a small child, and now she talking about she want to have babies? Why? Why does somebody as punch drunk as you want to have a kid so you can be around more people that are smarter than you? Like, it's just no.
Buckle up. Because what you're about to hear isn't a rumor whispered in corners. It's an alleged chain reaction that turned admiration into suspicion and silence into screaming headlines. I'm not here with a face, a badge, or a name. I'm here with fragments, timelines, screenshots that appeared and vanished, voices that cracked mid-sentence, and a public figure who, according to multiple claims, wasn't ready for the past to knock this hard. It started quietly, too quietly. A live stream notification, a familiar voice, and then a sentence that didn't sound accidental. Jaguar Wright didn't tease. She didn't joke. She spoke like someone who believed the truth had waited long enough. And when she said there was more behind the image everyone had been protecting, the room changed. Allegedly. What followed wasn't just talk. It was a shift. Because Claressa Shields wasn't just a name on a screen. She was an idea. Strength without cracks. Discipline without scandal. A woman who stood tall in public and appeared unshakable. That's why the reaction mattered. That's why the alleged explosion became the story. Sources claim the moment private material involving her ex-fiancé began circulating in certain circles, the response was instant and intense. Not confusion. Not denial. Anger. The kind that comes when control slips. Phones were reportedly shut off, then turned back on, then shut off again. This wasn't about embarrassment. This was about exposure. For months, the public narrative showed one version of reality. Photos that felt solid. Smiles that looked earned. A relationship framed as loyal and untouchable. But according to allegations now floating through media back channels, there was another layer running parallel. An old connection that never really ended. Private conversations that didn't stay private. And moments meant to remain invisible. Jaguar Wright didn't claim coincidence. She claimed intention. She suggested that what people saw was performance, and what they didn't see was planning. Allegedly. And when those words landed, fans didn't know where to look first. Some rushed to defend. Some went silent. Some started asking questions they'd never dared to ask before. Because if even a fraction of the claims were true, then this wasn't a mistake. It was a double life colliding with daylight. The name Tony Rich began appearing more often. Quietly at first, then louder. An ex-fiancé doesn't usually resurface without context, but here the context was explosive. Allegedly tied to secret meetings, voice notes, and a connection that refused to fade. And while the internet dissected every detail, another figure stood at the center of the fallout: Papoose. Publicly supportive, publicly present, publicly trusted. According to claims, that trust may have been the very thing exploited. There were whispers that his reputation, his visibility, and his loyalty were being leaned on to maintain an image that no longer matched reality. Not proven, not confirmed, but repeated enough to make the silence uncomfortable. What shook people wasn't just the alleged betrayal. It was the idea that someone so publicly celebrated for resilience could be privately accused of manipulation. Screens filled with reactions. Clips looped. Commentary turned harsh. Was the strength real? Was the love staged? And who knew what and when? Then the narrative twisted again. Because Jaguar Wright wasn't finished. She alleged that the situation wasn't one-sided. That deception wasn't limited to one person. That while one story was collapsing, another had been quietly building. A name surfaced. Taseki. The implication was devastating. If true, it meant the fallout wasn't about one broken bond, but a chain of hidden connections overlapping and imploding at once. Everyone moving in shadows. Everyone believing they were protected. Until they weren't. The internet doesn't wait for confirmation. It feeds on reaction. And when Claressa Shields reportedly went silent, that silence became the loudest statement of all. No immediate clarification. No clean denial. Just absence. And in gossip culture, absence is interpreted as guilt. Comment sections turned cruel. Support turned conditional. And the woman once seen as untouchable was suddenly being questioned by people who once defended her without hesitation. Then came Remy Ma. Not a press release. Not a formal accusation. Just words that cut deep enough to feel intentional. Allegedly. A statement that felt less like commentary and more like a verdict. It didn't mention names, but it didn't need to. The timing did all the talking. Those words spread faster than the original claims. Screenshotted. Reposted. Turned into captions that felt like warnings. And for Claressa, the damage wasn't just reputational, it was emotional. According to insiders, the pressure wasn't external alone. It was internal collapse. A realization that the narrative could no longer be controlled, and the past had found a microphone. This wasn't just about a tape. It was about trust eroding in public. It was about admiration turning into doubt. And tragedy doesn't always look like tears on camera. Sometimes it looks like a legacy cracking while the world watches. Part 1 ends here, not because the story is finished, but because this was the moment everything shifted. The moment silence stopped protecting anyone. And what comes next won't be quieter. And what comes next didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with pressure. The kind that builds behind the ribs, tightens the throat, and turns every unanswered message into evidence. According to people close to the situation, the days after the alleged revelations were not calm. They were frantic. Not because of what the public was saying, but because of what was being privately confirmed. Screenshots began circulating in smaller circles. Voice notes were allegedly matched to timelines. Old travel dates were suddenly being revisited with new meaning. And Claressa Shields, once praised for her discipline, was now being dissected for her silence. That silence became a courtroom of its own. Fans acted like jurors. Commentators acted like prosecutors. And every pause was treated like a confession. Sources claim Claressa didn't step forward immediately because there was disagreement behind the scenes. Not about whether to respond, but how much truth could be admitted without collapsing everything else. Because once you admit one crack, the wall doesn't hold. The alleged involvement of her ex-fiancé wasn't fading. It was growing louder. Tony Rich's name was now attached to claims that felt too specific to dismiss. Dates, locations, patterns. People began connecting dots that were never meant to align publicly. A past relationship was no longer past. It was active, breathing, and dragging the present down with it. And then there was the emotional cost. Insiders described Claressa as unreachable. Not hiding, but overwhelmed. The pressure wasn't just public judgment. It was the weight of being accused of manipulating perception. Of using loyalty as camouflage. Of playing two lives against each other until neither survived intact. Meanwhile, Papoose remained visibly restrained. No outbursts. No public accusations. Just controlled distance. But that restraint didn't protect him from becoming part of the narrative. In fact, it made him central to it. Commentators began asking whether his silence was dignity or delayed realization. Because if the allegations were true, then the betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. His image. His credibility. His trust. All allegedly leveraged to keep a story intact that no longer matched reality. And that's where the tragedy sharpened. This wasn't just about someone being hurt. It was about someone being used without knowing it. As the online reaction escalated, So did the internal fractures. There were claims that Claressa tried to contain the damage by addressing only parts of the story privately, hoping the rest would burn out. But gossip doesn't burn out, it multiplies. Every attempt at containment was allegedly met with another leak, another voice, another reminder that once something escapes, it doesn't return. Jaguar Wright didn't retreat. She doubled down. Her statements became more pointed, less vague. She framed the situation not as scandal, but as exposure. Not as accident, but as design. Allegedly. She suggested that power doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks charming, controlled, and patient. And that suggestion hit harder than any clip ever could. Because it shifted the question from "did this happen?" to "who benefited?" And the internet answered ruthlessly. Claressa's achievements were suddenly being reframed. Not erased, but questioned. Was the strength authentic or selectively presented? Was the vulnerability real or strategically hidden? That shift hurt more than denial ever could. Then came the secondary fallout. Friends distancing themselves quietly. Collaborations stalling without explanation. Support becoming conditional. No statements were made, but actions spoke loudly. According to sources, the emotional toll was severe. Not theatrical. Not performative. Real. The kind that doesn't show on camera but leaves marks anyway. Nights without sleep. Conversations replayed obsessively. The constant feeling that every move would be interpreted as guilt. And in the middle of that pressure, the story twisted again. Because whispers began to suggest that Claressa wasn't the only one blindsided. Allegedly, there were moments where Papoose himself started revisiting memories. Comments that once seemed harmless. Absences that once felt normal. The kind of hindsight that hurts because it arrives too late. People began asking whether he'd been protecting her or protecting a version of her that never fully existed. And then there was the claim involving Taseki. That claim didn't just complicate the narrative. It detonated it. If true, it meant deception wasn't isolated. It meant multiple timelines overlapped. Multiple loyalties were compromised. And everyone involved was operating under assumptions that no longer held. The story no longer fit into clean sides. There were no clear heroes. No simple villains. Only people reacting to a truth unraveling faster than anyone could manage. The emotional center shifted again when commentary turned from shock to sorrow. Because beneath the gossip was a reality people couldn't ignore. This was someone's life collapsing in public. Not a character. Not a headline. A human being watching years of work and identity be reframed in hours. And the internet isn't gentle with collapse. It demands explanations. It punishes hesitation. It consumes vulnerability. Remy Ma's earlier words continued to echo, not because they were repeated, but because they fit too well. They became a lens through which everything else was viewed. Every silence. Every pause. Every delayed response. For Claressa, the tragedy wasn't just reputational. It was existential. Who are you when the image you built no longer protects you? Who believes you when doubt becomes louder than defense? And how do you recover when the narrative has already decided who you are? As days passed, the story refused to settle. It stayed volatile, shifting with each new reaction, each new interpretation. People weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting. Waiting for a statement. Waiting for denial. Waiting for confirmation. But nothing came. And that absence became the loudest testimony yet. Because in gossip culture, silence isn't neutrality. It's surrender. By the time part 2 closes, the damage is undeniable. Relationships strained. Trust fractured. Public opinion hardened. And a woman once celebrated for resilience now standing accused of emotional deception. Not convicted. Not proven. But permanently questioned. What began as admiration ended as scrutiny. And what comes next won't be about what was leaked, it will be about what finally gets said. Because eventually, silence breaks. And when it does, there's no going back. And eventually, the silence cracked not with a statement, but with consequences. Because when nothing is said for too long, the world fills in the blanks on its own. By this point, the story had stopped being about leaks and started being about damage control. According to insiders, meetings were happening off the record. Not to clarify truth, but to measure fallout. Every option carried risk. Speak and validate the fire. Stay quiet and let suspicion harden into belief. Claressa Shields was no longer being judged for what she allegedly did. She was being judged for what she wouldn't explain. That distinction matters. Public trust doesn't disappear instantly. It erodes. And by the time people notice it's gone, it's already too late to retrieve. Whispers grew louder that Claressa had been advised to wait it out. That the internet would move on. That another scandal would replace this one. But the problem was timing. This story didn't break during distraction. It broke during attention. Every move she didn't make became a headline someone else wrote for her. And then came the emotional implosion behind closed doors. Sources claim conversations between Claressa and Papoose were no longer about the allegations, they were about history. Replayed moments. Misread signals. The kind of arguments that aren't loud, but leave permanent fractures. When trust is questioned, even innocent memories start to feel staged. People close to him describe a man forced into reflection he never asked for. Not rage, not revenge, just realization. If even half of what was alleged carried truth, then the pain wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation layered with loyalty. Standing publicly for someone who may have been privately undermining the bond changes how a person sees themselves. And that's the tragedy gossip doesn't talk about enough. Because while the internet loves spectacle, it rarely acknowledges the quiet collapse of identity that follows. As the narrative intensified, Claressa's achievements were no longer shields. They became contrasts. Every victory replayed online was now paired with commentary questioning authenticity, not erasing her success, but framing it against alleged deception. That duality was brutal. Strong, yet accused of manipulation. Respected, yet doubted. Admired, yet isolated. And isolation is where things unravel fastest. According to insiders, Claressa withdrew from spaces she once dominated. Not because she feared confrontation, but because she no longer controlled the story. When control disappears, presence becomes vulnerability. Meanwhile, Jaguar Wright remained unshaken. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften her tone. She didn't retreat. Instead, she positioned herself as the voice willing to endure backlash to expose patterns she believed were real. Allegedly. Her framing never shifted from accountability. That consistency made her claims harder to dismiss, even for those who didn't want to believe them. Because consistency in gossip culture reads as conviction. And then came the moment that sealed the public's interpretation. No dramatic press conference. No tearful denial. Just time passing. Time allowed the story to fossilize into perception. The longer Claressa remained silent, the more the internet rewrote her narrative without her consent. She was no longer seen as responding late, she was seen as choosing not to respond at all. And in a culture addicted to immediacy, delayed truth feels like dishonesty. People began speaking not in questions, but conclusions. She planned it. He was used. It was always a double life. None of it proven. All of it repeated. And repetition turns rumor into reputation. The alleged involvement of Tony Rich faded slightly, not because it was resolved, but because attention shifted to impact. The focus was no longer on who did what, it was on who lost what. And the losses were undeniable. A relationship fractured beyond repair. Public admiration replaced by skepticism. A legacy now carrying an asterisk that may never be removed. This is how scandals end, not with clarity, but with scars. Those close to Claressa describe a woman confronting something deeper than backlash. She was confronting the possibility that even if she told her side, it might not matter anymore. That once trust is broken in public, repair doesn't trend. And that realization hits harder than accusation. Because it forces a question no one prepares for. What happens when your truth arrives after people stop listening? The courtroom of public opinion doesn't adjourn. It doesn't recess. It just moves on, leaving verdicts behind without ever announcing them. For Papoose, the aftermath looked different. According to observers, his restraint earned him sympathy. Not because he spoke, but because he didn't exploit the moment. His silence was interpreted as dignity. His distance as self-respect. In a story filled with alleged manipulation, restraint became its own statement. And that contrast didn't favor Claressa. Because in tragedy, perception chooses sides even when facts don't. By the time commentary slowed, the damage was already integrated into culture. Memes had faded, but suspicion lingered. Clips stopped circulating, but the memory stayed. That's the cruel part of viral fallout. It doesn't need constant fuel once it's burned in. This wasn't just a scandal cycle. It was a permanent shift. Claressa's shields may continue to succeed. She may rebuild. She may reclaim parts of her narrative. But the version of her that existed before this moment is gone. Not destroyed by proof. Not erased by confession. But altered by doubt. And doubt is irreversible. The story doesn't end with confirmation or denial. It ends with something quieter and far more tragic, uncertainty cemented into identity. For the audience, this was entertainment. For those involved, it was loss. Because when private lives become public trials, no one leaves unmarked. And the most devastating verdicts aren't delivered by judges or cameras, they're delivered by silence that arrives too late to save anything. This wasn't just gossip. It was a cautionary collapse. And once it happens, there's no appeal. And now, the world is watching, and nothing will ever look the same. The whispers have become a roar, and the fragments of private moments have erupted into a spectacle no one can ignore. Claressa Shields, once untouchable, has become a symbol of vulnerability, exposed not by choice, but by circumstance. Every image, every smile, every public victory is now weighed against allegations that refuse to fade. The private becomes public, the hidden becomes viral, and trust fractures in real time. Fans are divided. Allies are silent. critics are relentless. The story isn't just about a leak, it's about power, manipulation, and consequence. Allegations don't care about innocence. They don't wait for clarification. They grow, they spread, they define perception before the truth can catch up. And in this chaos, every participant, every bystander, every fan becomes part of the narrative, complicit in shaping the legacy that is unraveling before their eyes. Claressa's shield's strength is being tested like never before. Papoose's loyalty is under scrutiny. Tony Rich's presence in the shadows is questioned. And Jaguar Wright's voice, unwavering and fearless, keeps the storm alive, pushing every secret to the surface. Social media trembles, commentary explodes, and every new clip, every screenshot, every insider revelation fuels the fire. This is more than scandal. This is tragedy. This is a story of reputation, betrayal, and consequences played out on a global stage. The question is no longer what happened, but who can survive the fallout? Who will rise, and who will be consumed by doubt, suspicion, and relentless public gaze? And here's where you come in. Watch closely, follow every revelation, share every moment, because this story is unfolding live, and if you blink, you'll miss the truth as it detonates. The drama isn't over. The reckoning is just beginning. Be ready.